Hey guys, Edward here from Edward79, the mixed content creator. Now, I know my ranking metals from lowest to highest melting point series, parts 1, 2, and 3 in the description below, has remained unfinished for almost a year now, with me last leaving off on part 3 ending in zirconium. But this week, everything changes, as this long-awaited finale completes the ranking metals from lowest to highest melting point series. So without further ado, let's get into the list. First up in part 4 is Chromium. While you might not expect it, Chromium is surprisingly tough, as it doesn't rust and is hard. So hard is, in fact, that it's actually the hardest, though not toughest, that's coming later, metal in the world, and third hardest element on the periodic table behind carbon in the form of diamonds and boron. Because of this, chromium is actually used in stainless steel, both to harden it and make it rust resistant. In fact, the entire difference between regular and stainless steel is the presence or absence of chromium. Stainless steel has chromium mixed in, and regular steel does not. Chromium's melting point is really high, with a melting point of 3,465 degrees Fahrenheit or 1,907 degrees Celsius. Next up is chromium's next-door neighbor on the periodic table, vanadium. As for hardness, vanadium is typically described as a soft metal, but that's only really because that while it's actually a medium hard metal, it's comparatively very malleable and not very brittle at all. Hardness aside, however, vanadium also has a very light color, as pure vanadium is a very light gray, with the color being described as almost white as a testament to the metal's almost white color. And similar to chromium, vanadium is used in steel alloys, and the strength of vanadium steel alloys make it perfect for use in tools and many other items. Vanadium has the 9th highest melting point of the metals mentioned in the series, as vanadium melts at 3,470 degrees Fahrenheit or 1,910 degrees Celsius. Now moving on to the most expensive metal in the world, next up is rhodium. While rhodium might not seem that valuable compared to platinum, gold, silver, or palladium, rhodium fetches a much higher price than any of these metals, with just 1 troy ounce of rhodium fetching a wallet-draining $15,450. More than 3 times the price of the world's next most expensive metal, iridium, which is only about $5,000 a troy ounce. And as far as rhodium is concerned, with a high price comes a boiling hot melting point, as rhodium melts at a scorching 3,565 degrees Fahrenheit or 1,963 degrees Celsius. Yet another crazy expensive metal on this list. Next up is ruthenium, the 6th most expensive metal in the world, with a price tag of around $700 a troy ounce. Although you may not expect it, ruthenium is used heavily in the solar cells inside solar panels that convert light energy into electricity, as well as having use in the jewelry industry to harden platinum. And while ruthenium is very unreactive at room temperature, anything at or hotter than 800 degrees Celsius will cause it to react with oxygen and oxidize. Oh, and for the love of God, do not mix it with potassium chlorate, unless you want to have a violent explosion of oxidizing ruthenium at your fingertips. Ruthenium has one of the highest melting points of any metal, with a melting point of 4,233 degrees Fahrenheit or 2,334 degrees Celsius. Sticking to the theme of metals that are ridiculously expensive, next up is Iridium, the second most expensive metal in the world and one of the rarest in Earth's crust, as Iridium occurs at about 0.001 parts per million in the Earth's crust. And although I mentioned it when I talked about Rhodium earlier in the video, Iridium too is crazy expensive, coming in at about $5,000 for a troy ounce. Similar to Ruthenium, Iridium is used heavily in the jewelry industry to harden platinum due to it being so hard and brittle, especially compared to some of the softer and more ductile metals on this list. Many of its uses outside the jewelry industry are due to its insanely high melting point, as Iridium has a melting point of 4,435 degrees Fahrenheit or 2,446 degrees Celsius. Next up on this list is niobium, a metal that, similar to chromium and vanadium, is used heavily in steel alloys to strengthen them. And believe me, these niobium alloys of steel are used in a lot of things. Jet engines, rockets, beams for buildings and oil rigs, oil and gas pipelines, and more are all from this element's comparatively super strong alloys with steel. Ironically, however, the metal is actually rather soft and ductile, not hard and brittle like other metals used to strengthen alloys of steel. Or whatever metal, really. All this aside, niobium has an insanely high melting point, as niobium melts at a sizzling 4,476 degrees Fahrenheit or 2,469 degrees Celsius. Next up on this list is tantalum, and although many say it's rare, it's actually not terribly rare, as tantalum occurs anywhere from 1 to 2 parts per million in the Earth's crust. For comparison, silver occurs at 0.1 parts per million, gold occurs at 0.004 parts per million, and platinum occurs at 0.005 parts per million. Its uses range from airplane parts and surgical equipment to components of missiles, chemical plants, and even nuclear power plants. But far and away the metal's biggest use is in electronic components, which means the very device you're watching this video on contains parts made of tantalum. Tantalum has one of the highest melting points of any metal, with a melting point of 5,468 degrees Fahrenheit or 3,020 degrees Celsius. A crazy expensive and surprisingly toxic metal, though with comparatively few uses. Next up is osmium, a metal with surprisingly few uses for how expensive it is. Its really hard alloys are used in the tips of both fountain and ballpoint pens, as well as in compass needles, record player needles, those electrical contacts, and pivot screws for instruments. It's also surprisingly toxic. Well, not the osmium itself, but instead it's the result of the metal's oxidation, osmium tetroxide, that's really dangerous. Even touching it can cause serious problems. Osmium has the third highest melting point of any metal on this list, with a melting point of 5,491 degrees Fahrenheit or 3,033 degrees Celsius. Taking the silver metal of extreme melting points is rhenium, a metal that has the second highest melting point among metals and third highest melting point among elements, as only carbon and the last metal in this video and the series have a higher melting point than rhenium. It's silvery white and very hard, and even though I left rhenium out of my ranking metals from least to most dense series, both parts in the description below, I should note that rhenium is incredibly dense, holding a density of 21.02 grams per cubic centimeter, making it one of the densest metals on Earth. Like I said before, rhenium's melting point is insanely hot, as Rhenium melts at a blistering 5,759 degrees Fahrenheit or 3,182 degrees Celsius. Finally, to wrap up this video and the entire series, we have tungsten, the metal with the highest melting point in the world. Now, you may or may not know about tungsten for its strength, but what you probably don't know is that tungsten can actually maintain its strength even in the heat. So good, in fact, that this borderline badass metal actually gets stronger at temperatures at or above 1,650 degrees Celsius. And because of its combination of strength that puts even titanium to shame and a high melting point, tungsten is used in heating elements and light bulb filaments, as well as to provide strength in alloys of iron, nickel, and sometimes even cobalt. Like I said earlier, tungsten has the highest melting point of any metal, with a melting point of a boiling hot 6,191 degrees Fahrenheit or 3,422 degrees Celsius. So there you have it, the fourth and final part of ranking metals from lowest to highest melting point. We hope you enjoyed this video. As always, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!